Well, folks, it is that time of the year again. So welcome to the Princeton Review's Medical Admissions Timeline webinar. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff today, and it may be a little sensory overload, but be patient. I will get you through it. First of all, before we get started, I just wanted to let you guys know you're in listen only mode, but I'm going to be taking questions at the end of this broadcast. So if you just want to post your questions at the end, I'll try to go back through and answer as many of your questions as possible. Let me give you a little bit of background about me before we get started in this, and then we're going to talk about sort of what this whole journey means. I'm going to give you some stats, and stats are great, but they're only as good as you know how to use them or what to do with them. So first of all, my name's Dr. Anita Paschall. I've been doing this. I am a freaking dinosaur. I've been doing this for over 24 years now. I am an MD, PhD, so I've been through the whole process. So I've been on your sides. And one of the things I always tell my students that I work with is, I don't tell you these things to be condescending. I honestly tell you these things so you don't make the same mistakes I did. I look back on my application a gazillion years ago, and I think about, I laugh almost at times when some students will say things to me and I was like, yep, that was me, exactly the same thing. So I'm going to give you a little insight into that aspect because I've applied, I've gotten into med school, gone through the whole thing, become a doctor, done my PhD programs, but I've also counseled undergrads at an R1 institution for over 15 years. In addition to that, I have sat on over time 8 different admissions committees, currently 5 that I work with. So more than anything, I sort of want to impart my knowledge of how we look at things from an admissions committee side of things. So that's a little bit about me. We're going to talk about just sort of medical admissions, give you some stats. Then I'm going to talk to you sort of an overview of the application process and how really to proceed with that. But before I get started, let me find out a little bit about you guys, and then I want to talk to you about why medicine. Okay, so just so I know who I'm working with here, if you don't mind, let me open the polls. If you could tell me when you're planning to apply. Have you already applied and you're sort of looking at, oh crap, am I going to have to reapply? Are you planning to apply in this upcoming cycle or future application cycle? So it looks like most of you guys are looking to apply in this upcoming cycle, which would be the 23-24 cycle. And then I've got another bunch of you guys who are looking to in the future cycle. So that's perfectly fine. I just really needed to know. I don't have anybody out there who's already applied, so this will be good for all of you guys to sort of figure out what you're going to need. All right, so with that in mind, let's get learning. What does it take to get into med school? You know, if you look at the stats, guys, it can be overwhelming. See, last year, on an average year, we typically see acceptance rates of around 40 to 42% of the people who apply get accepted. And I know for a lot of people that can be like, holy cow, like I applied to college and I got in and it wasn't any problem. And I always talk about that getting into med school is almost like if you were a high school athlete, and I was actually a college athlete, so I get this. If you were a high school athlete and you were good enough, you were going to get into college. And that's kind of where you guys were. You might get a chance to play in college. But going from college athletics to play in the pros, there's such a small, minuscule amount. It's a talent level. It's overwhelming at times. And I often say that getting into med school is like going from college athletics to getting into the pros. Now, last year was an exceptional year. It was kind of that rebound post-COVID, everything. So typically on a year, we average between 54,000 and 58,000 applicants. Last year, we had almost 63,000 applicants. That is just like overwhelming to me. And there were 22,666, which is such a bizarre number to me, matriculates, because we had a couple of new med schools open and took additional applicants, but that was an acceptance rate of 36%. Okay. I mean, you've got better odds of flipping a coin. 2/3 of the folks were left sitting behind going, why did I not get in? Well, the interesting thing is, if we're looking at 40% accepted, 60% denied on an average year, of the 60% who get denied, 50% of these kids have strong GPAs and strong MCAT scores. And we always talk about this. I mean, so many of my students are so hyper-focused on their GPA and getting a good MCAT score. And please do not get me wrong, because that is going to be your first line screen. But your second line screen is truly going to be the experiences and the things you've done. So before I get started on some more details of stuff like that, and we'll start looking at all these numbers, because the numbers do continue to rise every year. And if we sort of look at this, if you look at applicants versus matriculates, okay, we're going to see that in 2021, 2022, okay, the average applicants GPA and MCAT score were slightly down from what we've seen year over year. And we sort of attributed that to online learning, COVID, things like that. But if you look at the matriculates, what you see is now the average MCAT score is almost 512, okay? And that was actually up, and the average GPA, science GPA and GPA were up as well. Not a huge amount, but you can sort of look that those applying were somewhere in like the 506 range with a 3.5, 3.6. Those accepted were more in the 512 and the 3.75. Now, does that mean if you don't have a 3.7 or if you don't have a 512 MCAT, you're not going to med school? No, it doesn't. But what it means is, as you start to look at schools, you start to plan programs, you've really got to think about what you bring to the table. So before we kind of venture down the numbers and the MCAT and what you got to get, I want to share with you a story. And as we go through this, I want you guys to sit back and think about, what are 10 really cool, unique things about me, about my journey? I get people all the time who are like, I don't know where to begin with my personal statement or what to write or whatever. I say sit down and do a timeline of your life and write 10 unique things about yourself, maybe a hurdle you've overcome, what sparked your passion for healthcare and medicine, things that you've done as a part of that process, and also unique things about yourself, hobbies, interests, etc. Then write down what I say are your 5 top selling points. Maybe you've done research for 3 years, you're published, maybe you've worked as a medical scribe, but list the things that are going to make you unique and stand out. Too often, the pre-meds that I work with were pre-meds just like I was, okay? I was so hyper-focused on my GPA, getting that great test score, and hitting all the checkbox, everything I was supposed to do. I got to get research, I got to shadow, I got to get paid clinical, I've got to have some type of leadership position, but I wasn't thinking about why I was doing it and how it fit into my application. If you ask any average pre-med, why do you want to go to med school? We get the same answers. And trust me, from one who interviews for so many admissions committees, if I hear one more time, I really want to help, and I want to serve, and I want to make a difference, and I really like science, and I'm going to change the world, and my grandmother died of cancer, and I want to make sure that no one else, and I'm not ridiculing you, because truthfully, those are really the reasons you should feel in your gut why you want to make a difference, but it is such a step past that. When I went to college, I was actually an architectural design major and a chemical engineering major. And I've told my students this story a lot. And I chose chemical engineering because it looked good in the course catalog. And when I enrolled in college, it was actually what was the best paying career at the time. And I was really good in high school chemistry, which was not engineering chemistry. So I will tell you, I got to engineering physics 1 and was like, no, not cut out for this. And I was also an architectural design major. At a point in my life, I actually built custom homes for about 5 years. Well, about the 3rd year, when I was a junior, I was like, I'm not digging this architectural design thing. Of course, then I'm staring at the wall going, now what am I going to do with the rest of my life? Well, to pay for my college education, I was an RA, I tutored, but one of the main things I did to earn money to fund my college education is I worked weekends, nights, and all holidays as an MA in a burn unit. And honestly, at that time, I really wasn't thinking about going to med school. I was thinking about paying the bills. So I had worked as an MA in a burn unit since high school. And now I'm a junior. And I looked back and I was like, I'm pretty good at this. I like taking care of people. I really like science, all those same reasons. Help, serve, make a difference. The summer that I was getting ready to apply to med school, we had a couple come that were admitted to the burn unit. They were a couple who were on their way home from their honeymoon, and they were hit head on by a drunk driver. And he was actually ejected from the car, and his wife was still in the car, and their car caught on fire. And he crawled back to the car to pull her out. And she actually sustained essentially no injuries, but he was burned over 75% of his body, second and third degree burns. We had taken care of him in the burn unit for almost 2 months on this particular day, and he had been intubated. And this particular day, they had extubated him. So his wife was so excited. She had pretty much not left his side, but she was so excited to be there with him, to be able to talk to him. So she had come into his room, and I was doing a dressing change on his arm. So I was kind of eavesdropping on him. And it was the coolest thing, because they were talking about how they were going to go on a second honeymoon when he got out. He was joking about how he hoped that their pet dog would not be afraid of him. And he was so excited because his mother was coming to visit that particular day. And they talked, and the whole time I'm just like all puffed up standing beside him, because I was like, this is why I'm going into medicine. I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to change the world. I'm going to help people just like this. And they talked for like 20 minutes, and he said he was tired and asked her if she would go downstairs and get him a protein milkshake that they had for our burn patients in the hospital cafeteria. And she was so excited to actually be able to do something for him. And the elevator to the cafeteria was right outside the doors of the burn unit. And I stood and I watched them, and she walked out and she pushed the door to the elevator. He never took his eyes off of her. And she turned around and she looked at him and realized she could see him through the windows, that he was watching her. So she waved and she blew him a kiss and she mouthed, "I love you." And I heard him say, "I love you too, baby." And the doors closed. And by this time I'm crying, right? And he turned and he looked at me and he said, "I really have no idea who you are, but I know you've probably been here throughout my treatment. And I just wanted to say thank you." So of course, then I'm puffing up and I'm like, "Oh, well, thank you. I'm happy to help." And then he took a deep breath and he rolled on his side, and then he flatlined. And I stood there in shock. And I pushed the code button, and they came in and they did all the typical stuff, with a code. And they actually ended up pronouncing him before she got back from the cafeteria. And I was like, I can't do this. I thought I wanted to go into medicine, but clearly I don't. And I remember I clocked out. I actually called in sick the next 2 days. And I got back to the burn unit to start my next shift. And my attending pulled me aside and he said, "You don't get it, do you?" And I was like, "Great, now I'm going to lose my job." And I said, "Okay, sir, what do I not get? What do I not understand?" And he said, "Well, since you made this decision, you wanted to go to med school." He said, "I've listened to you." And he said, "You've talked about how you're going to help and serve and make a difference in this world." And he said, "And you're probably the best MA we've ever hired in terms of your skill set. I know you've got the compassion for this." He said, "But you need to understand, medicine's not about you. And it's never going to be about you. And it's not about the patients, because you keep talking about the patients." He said, "We as physicians are gifted with the most incredible career on this planet, because we get to work with people as our patients. But you need to never lose sight of the fact that that patient you're curing, you're taking care of, you're hoping to give life back to, is a person, and that person has a life outside this burn unit, outside the walls of the clinic, outside the walls of any doctor's office, where they have people who depend on them, who love them." And that man knew he was going to die. He fought. I wish somebody had told me that. He fought to get back to share those last moments with his wife. And he said, and he let go, but he leaves behind a wife who will never be able to tell her husband she loves him again. He left behind a little dog at home who will never actually see him, a mother who did not get to say goodbye before he passed. And he said, and in each day, we get to meet people, we get to share parts of their lives, we get to learn about them, we get to build amazing relationships and hopefully give them a better chance at life through what we do. But it's not just gadgets and medicine and things you do, it's about the relationship with people. So as we talk about the things you're doing, AMCAS has what we call their 15 core competencies. And all of these things you are doing are to help you build and understand those core competencies. So as you get ready to apply and you sit down and you start writing out everything you've done, and I've had so many people in the past week send me their resumes and their stuff. That's wonderful. And we've got to figure out if you've got everything you need. But more importantly, you need to figure out how those things you've done have taught you the core competencies and how you articulate that in your personal statement, in your experiences, to catch the attention of an admissions committee. Because what you need to understand is that the average medical school is going to get about 10,000 applications. Okay, if it's an in-state only school that only takes in-state applications, it may be somewhere in like the 5,000 to 9,000 range. But it's 3 of the schools I work at last year, we got 13, 16, and 18,000 applications. We're going to interview 300 to 500 of those 10,000 applications for 100 slots. So you've got less than a 1 in 100 chance of getting one of those slots at any given school. So when you start to plan your school list, you be realistic about where your screening parameters are and then what you bring to the table, but most importantly, what makes you unique. When I applied to medical school a gazillion years ago, the standard was you go to school, you apply after your junior year with the plan to matriculate as soon as you finish your senior year and go directly in. It used to be that was the way 67% of people went, and maybe 30% or so would take a gap year. It is completely reversed now. Medical schools like the seasoned, older applicant, and we'll talk more about gap year later on, but they like the person who stepped outside the academic bubble, gained a job, gained real world experience, worked with other people, paid their bills, understands the people they're going to be working with. Of the applicants last year, there's about 35% applied as rising seniors after their junior year. Of that 35%, only 19% were accepted. So it's really about understanding what you bring to the table. So let's talk a little bit more about the stats before we move on. If you look at the number of applicants versus matriculates, we've already talked about that number, and we've definitely seen that we opened some more med schools, so the number of matriculates is up about 2%, but our applications were up 17% last year. If you're looking male to female, basically we're actually seeing that the female applicants now outnumber the male applicants. And interestingly enough, typically we're more closer to like 59 to 51%, but actually more females matriculated last year. I would like for you to pay attention to this though. The average age, and this year is going closer to 25 to 26. The average applicant age is about 25 to 26. Okay, that means most of those people are taking gap years. If you look at in versus out of state of the numbers that applied, about 23% applied in state versus 77 were out of state, out of their particular state. But when it comes to matriculates, 60% matriculated to their in-state. If you look at international, it makes up about 2% of our total applicants. This number was actually up last year. It has been as low as like 5 to 6%, and it was 9% last year. Osteopathic DO applicants were also up last year, up almost 20%, over 20%, and their matriculates were up 28.5%, so almost 30%. The mean MCAT for osteopathic programs was about 505, although what we are now seeing is that is closer to a 506, 507. They do take a slightly lower MCAT at about a 356. All right, if you break it down in and out of state by region, one of the things I want you to pay close attention to is this South and this West. West is composed strictly of California and a few from Washington. Notice that it comprises almost a quarter of our applicants. The South is noticeably larger, but you notice here that we're actually combining 5 states into this South sort of perspective. But if you look at where you matriculate in versus out of state, if you notice the numbers of what we're looking at, we're going to see a lot more people matriculating out of in-state versus California is the difference. And again, it is so hard. I have trouble getting my California residents into California, but look at these numbers of people who did not matriculate. And that's why it's important to make sure you have everything together before you apply. Because if you do not, if you don't apply on time, if you don't have your stuff together, you're going to be facing rejection. And rejection means few things. One, the screening standards are harder for reapplicants. Second, schools expect you to fix all of the reasons you did not get in before you reapply. And we are seeing more and more schools, especially on the East and West Coast, that are automatically denying the first year after you've been rejected if you immediately reapply. All right, if you're looking at ethnicity by GPA, race, etc., one of the things, if we break this down, white, Hispanic, Black, Asian, and international citizens, you kind of see the number of applicants, what we see here, as well as the median MCAT for matriculates and GPA. We do notice that there is a slightly lower acceptance rate for lower MCAT and lower GPA among Hispanic and African American populations, and please completely own that. I oftentimes have folks who go, my grandmother or my grandfather was Hispanic, but I don't really look that. And I will tell you, I am a quarter Cherokee Indian, which makes my children both an 8th Cherokee Indian, and it counts up to 1/16. And there are different criteria and more acceptance slots because every school needs these areas, because we need people to support all types of populations. We need to make sure that we have diversity there. And so both my children are legally American Indian. If you saw my children who look nothing like me, they are pale as the driven snow. They have blue eyes. They look nothing like me, but they are 1/8 Cherokee Indian. So by all means, they would have put that on their application. All right, so like I said, getting into med school is like moving from college athletics into the pros. Now, the 2 things that we know you've got to have that everybody assesses over is GPA and MCAT. All right, so if we're talking about the timeline, and this is going to be really important because we're just a week away from November, and I will actually be sending out my applicant timeline to all of my applicants next week. The biggest mistake I see people make in not having the stuff that they need is they wait too late. Time after time, it's like, I got to focus on my MCAT. I'm going to get my MCAT done. And after I get my MCAT done, I'm going to focus on my application. Well, ideally, you would want to take your MCAT by the summer before you're getting ready to apply. So if you need to reapply, you can, retest, you can test in the spring. But it's okay if you haven't, because you may be planning to test in the spring. But you can't wait to test January, March, or April and then go, now I'm going to work on my personal statement. Personal statements, letters of recommendation, experience pages are not written on a weekend. They are written just like you work on your MCAT. You want to spend about 6 months working on compiling this together. The other thing is, if you don't have what you need, realizing that in April is going to be way too late, and you will be staring at a gap year. So I start working with my students on their personal statement and thinking about their letters of recommendation in November and December, brainstorming their personal statement. For the students that I work with and my other experts, they will have their first draft of their personal statement submitted in January, the first draft of their experiences in February, then the second drafts and the third drafts of those will be due in March and April. That way, when the application opens, there's no hurry up, oh crap, what am I going to do? Oh, I'm missing stuff. You just key your application and we start working on secondary essays. So this is the actual timeline. The other thing is, asking for letters of recommendation. I do webinars in January and April about how to write your personal statement and experiences and the most common mistakes. But I will tell you that if you haven't started gathering your letters of recommendation, you want to start asking by January and give them a deadline of April 30th. That way, if they happen to be lagging, you can still get them in May. Now, you don't need all your letters in to submit your application, but most application services will not consider you as complete until all your letters are in. So it's a better way to go. And by the way, make sure whether or not your school has a review committee. And if they do, I encourage you to use it. Now, when we talk about this timeline, we're going to be using the whole time between January to April to write a personal statement, drafting those 15 experiences, writing those 3 most meaningful, and getting all of your letters of recommendation together so that when the application opens in May, all you do is send your transcript and key your application. We'll talk more in detail about what goes into your personal statement and experiences in January, but that should be your mental timeline. Once that primary is good to go, start pre-writing secondary essays. There are lists from the prior year's prompts. There are core essays that we see every year. There's always a diversity. There's always a hurdle you've overcome. There's always a tell me a little bit about yourself. Key essays that you can carve out in May and June so that when you start receiving secondaries in July, you can turn these around in 2 to 3 weeks. I see people time after time after time who put so much emphasis on the primary and forget that there's even going to be a secondary application. They get behind, overwhelmed, and don't turn their secondaries back in time. And that's like the kiss of death. It's really funny because 3 of the schools that I interview at, when we're still getting secondaries in September and October, to us, that's a sign either A, your school wasn't that important to you, or B, you were just slack in getting to it and you weren't motivated enough to do it. And then anywhere from August into January, February is where we see interviews. We'll talk a little bit more about that. You want to send letters of continued interest or letters of intent. Letters of continued interest are for schools that you have sent secondaries to but have not interviewed at. Letters of intent are schools that you have interviewed at but have not heard a decision or have been waitlisted. That's your intent to attend. But those should go out in November and December, and again in February, late February for schools that you're still in play for. The problem is the typical student doesn't even start writing this personal statement until April. They're working on other parts of their application in May. Those applications start lagging in into June, and applications are on a roll, most are on rolling admissions. So it's going to take 4 to 5 or 6 weeks for AMCAS or Oklahoma's or Texas to review your application. That's why you want to be able to submit as soon as applications open, like May, the first week of June. If it's DO and Texas, that's the 1st of May, and that way they can start processing your application. No schools see your application anytime until they actually release to schools, which is for DO and Texas toward the end of May. For MD, that's toward the end of June, 1st of July. You can continue to add schools at any given time. We'll talk a little bit about that with your MCAT. So there's the primary application, and here's the other thing. People so often get so focused on their personal statement. And I'm going to tell you, there has never been a personal statement in my 24 years of doing this on committee that I've read that I've been like, oh yeah, we got to accept this person. Now, there have been some I've read where we've been like, probably not going to interview that person. But the personal statement is probably the least important part of your application. Having the right GPA and MCAT, yes, but the second screen is going to be your experiences and making sure that you hit the key AMCAS categories, that you have enough hours, that you have enough exposure, and how you articulate in that experiences description what you did, what the group was, what your role was, and what you learned from it. And it's interesting because in the past 2 years, I have not done a rejection review for a student who had below a 518 MCAT and below a 3.8 GPA. And the primary reasons, other than submitting too late, is not having enough experiences. Your first screen is going to be on that GPA and MCAT. The second is truly going to be a grid, and it is going to be a grid that's going to weight how much research, how much service, how much clinical, how much leadership you have, how many hours, and how it weights those. Secondary applications you need to be aware of, because this 70% is actually super low. Last year, we saw that 90% of schools are now automatically generating secondaries. And I need you to understand that because you receive a secondary does not mean they've even looked at your application, okay? Secondary applications, and if you read the fine print somewhere on the secondary or somewhere on their website, it will say, if you do not meet our criteria, your application will not be evaluated. Well, when the average secondary is $90 to $150, you should think long and hard about the programs you're applying to. The average AMCAS applicant applied to between 7 and 15 schools. Most of my students apply to around 20, 25 if DO, but do the math, guys, because you struggle to get your personal statement written. Secondaries, most schools send a minimum of 3 to 5 secondaries. Some like Miami, Greenville, there may be 10 essays. Duke, very long essays. So if you apply to 25 schools and you get even just 4 essays, that's 100 essays in the month of July. So think long and hard about what you're doing. Set a grid. We'll talk more about that in July. And then what everybody waits for are the interviews. And this is also going to be very different from college, okay? We say on a really, really good year, you're going to apply to 20 schools. You're going to get 19 to 20 secondaries because of what I just talked to you about. You're going to hope to get 5 interviews. And that's a really good year. All right. And out of those 5 interviews, 1 acceptance is considered amazing year. Again, we just talked about 3/4 of the people were left behind. So that is very important to keep in mind. We said the average GPA is around 3.7 to 3.75. Again, there's going to be a weighting perspective of this where your science GPA falls. Generally, what we say is, and the average MCAT score is around 511 to 512. What we generally say is that the minimum requirement is like a 3.45 and above. The lower this GPA is, the higher this MCAT needs to be to offset it. We say that a 510 will get you through most screens for midline schools. 512 is considered by most schools, they sort of say, okay, they know what they're doing. At about 516, you start to turn heads. If you're retaking your MCAT, you need to understand that you need to go up by at least 3 points for to schools it to be considered clinically, statistically significant. The other thing is, I'm always astounded at the number of people who are applying to med school with like 20 hours of shadowing or 15 or 40 hours of shadowing. This is like job sharing, okay? And schools want to know that you have invested the time in getting the experience that you need. And we'll talk more about exactly what you need in that experience, but a general bare minimum is around 100 hours in a total of 3 to 4 different disciplines. 1 must be primary care. The average number of shadowing hours last year was almost 400. We say diversity over quantity is better, meaning I'd rather see you shadowing in 5 different specialties for 20 to 30 hours each than shadowing for 300 hours just in surgery. I don't care if you want to go into surgery, okay? They want you to experience different types of medicine. And you think about it, if you've got, I drive a BMW and they're complicated as hot mess to work on. So when I take it to the BMW dealership where people have been trained in working on my vehicle, and it's not just the first time they've seen a BMW, or somebody really likes cars and they think they will be a good mechanic. You've got to have that experience, and paid experience is astronomical. Hands-on patient care, be that, and in this order, being a scribe or a scribe in an MA or a CNA or an EMT. And it's generally in that order of what they're looking at. If you have lower credentials, if you are a 3.5 or below, or if your MCAT is a 508 to a 5.8, you need to be willing to either consider a DO program or to do a master's program and then apply. We always say, if you've got a lower GPA, do not apply and start a master's program in the fall, because screening's not even really done. And by the time you get your first grades, we've enrolled half our class. You need to have a minimum of 1 year of master's level coursework. If your GPA is a 3.25 or below a 500, you need to consider gap years, completing a master's degree to increase your MCAT, or a Caribbean program. The importance of a GPA and an MCAT cannot be stressed enough, okay? A strong MCAT can help offset a slightly lower GPA. Now, if you look at the stats, yes, there were, I think, 2 people last year with a 3.2 who got into an MD program, but they both had MCAT scores of over a 520 and very high experiences. But a poor MCAT score can completely crush a 4.0 GPA. All right, so we talked about when you should take the MCAT. Ideally, it would be great if you had gotten it in the summer before you're ready to apply, but if not, you need to make sure that you are testing no later than March or April, okay? You want to wait 48 hours after testing and schedule a retest date at least 3 weeks after you have applied. That you would have gotten your scores back. That allows you, and what we say is, give yourself a break after taking your test, schedule your retest, take like a week and a half off, and then go back to doing practice problems and like a practice test a week. And I cannot emphasize enough the importance of practice test, practice test, practice test. I don't know how many students that I work with who we come into this and I'm like, how many practice tests have you taken? You're testing this Saturday, and they'll say 2. And I'm like, oh my goodness, it is like a marathon. And you would never get up one morning and go, I'm going to go run a marathon. It is the same thing with your MCAT. The biggest part is, yes, reviewing all your content, but I cannot overemphasize the importance of doing practice problems and doing practice tests. Okay, now, once you've given yourself that little break from studying and you're waiting on your test score, go back to doing those practice problems and practice tests and wait for your score. Now, if things happen, they happen in life, and if you're not going to be able to test until like mid-May, okay, what you want to do, or the latter part of May, and you're not going to have a score, you want to submit to one super reach school that you are never going to get into. All right, submit to Stanford, Harvard, one of the upper crust, wherever, so that AMCAS can start verifying your application. Then you can get your test score back and decide, where do I fit for schools? If your score's not good enough, you may want to take a gap year, or you may want to retest, so you better gauge what schools you're applying to, because once you are verified by AMCAS, any school you applied to, be it you did nothing else, you went no further, no secondary, no nothing, you will still be considered a reapplicant for that school. So choose wisely. This is the basic breakdown of the MCAT. It's 230 questions. It's a 6-hour and 15-minute test, 8 hours with breaks, and the score range is anywhere from 472 to 528. Again, you're shooting to be at least a 512 for your sort of breakdown. Here is what you're looking at though. So AMCAS and the media schools, here is where you are in a 520. Most people, here is your 50th percentile in about the 500 to 504. You need to be here or higher, okay, which is going to put you more in the 80th percentile. Here's your score range and your score breakdown. So you see that a 512, which was the average last year, was the 85th percentile. I've had lots of people who are like, I want a 518, I want a 520. Guys, there is very little difference here. Once you're above a 518, we know you know your material. Now, I've been talking so much about your experiences and what your experiences mean. And I cannot emphasize enough is I'm going to give you a mnemonic, a way to think about your experiences and what you're done. And it is called CLASS. And we want to get an A+ in this class, and that A+ is going to stand for acceptance. So it is CLASS. you've got to make sure you've got all of these areas covered: clinical, leadership, academic, service, and social. Let's briefly talk about what goes into each of those components. We've already said for clinical, we want a minimum of 100 hours. That last year it was closer to 400, and you want to be shadowing in different areas, 3 to 5 different areas, including primary care. Paid clinical, be that you get it while you're in school or you take that gap year to get clinical experience, is a big, big plus. Scribing, they love scribing because you have to critically think through the diagnostic process. You learn patient interview skills. Working as a CNA, MA, you learn hard skills, blood draws, taking vital signs, rooming patients. EMTB the problem with EMTB is if you're in a very urban area, if you're in a highly populated city area, you don't get to do a lot of patient contact. You get a lot of observation. So if you've only got your EMTB, I would encourage you to look to volunteer or work in an outlying area where you will get more hands-on experience. Another way to actually get paid clinical, it's working as a clinical research associate or a clinical research coordinator, where you're actually working with patients, because then you get double bang for your buck because you're getting research and you're getting hands-on clinical, which is a great way to use a gap year. All right, leadership. We want at least 2 leadership experiences. And I don't care, president of the Mickey Mouse Club or president of the United States. What you need to show is that you can create a level of trust with others, because good leaders inspire trust in others. And you've got to be a good leader for your patients. You've got to be a good leader for your office staff, and you've got to be a good leader for your colleagues. So more often than not, in your leadership experience, I want to hear about a way that you've maybe stumbled and regrouped and became a more effective leader, how you created an effective team dynamic, and how you worked well with other people. So for clinical, we're looking for a minimum of 100 hours. That can be combined from shadowing. It can be combined from volunteering in a hospital, but it should not all be dedicated to one area. When we're talking about leadership, I want you to have a minimum of 2 leadership experiences. That can be a mentor. That can be training other people as a medical scribe. It can be teaching and training other people in the lab, which is a great thing because they get you teaching and leadership experience. So be creative in how you speak to it. Academic is actually much more diverse. It's actually broken into, in addition to your GPA, 4 categories. Research. Is research required? No. But AMCATs and many schools think that the only way you can get the scientific evaluation and the critical thinking components is through actually doing research. Ideally, we want at least 2 semesters or a year of research experience. If you only have a semester, it's not going to be as strong, but at least you can demonstrate critical thinking. Ideally, we want either a wet lab or a sort of clinically based type of research study, not a data analysis study. Things that benefit are presenting in team meetings, presenting at research symposiums, getting publications, but it's more about learning the research process than exactly what you did. Now, when we're talking about being a teaching assistant or a tutor, we're speaking specifically to being able to explain complicated information to other people. So ways you do this is as a teaching assistant or a tutor in your undergrad, then you're tutoring peers. But other things you could do is look to get involved with outreach services for like maybe tutoring underserved students in elementary to high school areas. Then you understand the struggles that people with less resources, people from different backgrounds go to understand. And then the other is educating the elderly. Look at the literacy learning programs, the elderly literacy learning programs in your areas. Get out in your community and get involved. Study abroad. Now, it's not just about doing a study abroad. It's about potentially traveling abroad. It's about your own personal heritage. It's about working with people of different backgrounds, different nationalities, different religions. It's more about putting yourself outside your comfort zone and developing empathy and appreciation for other cultures. So that if you have somebody, and let's say maybe you have somebody in your office who is of Chinese Asian descent, 100%. So we've got a blend of Eastern and Western medicine. And you're basically saying, okay, here's what you need to do, and I'm going to prescribe this and I'm going to do this. Well, a part of their upbringing and heritage may also rely on certain aspects of different herbals or backgrounds. And so you need to be able to understand that and bridge that and be able to communicate and appreciate their values based on their different backgrounds. That also ties in directly to language proficiency. A quarter of our world's population speaks Mandarin or Spanish. Those are highly, highly valued by schools, but other types of languages are also appreciated. If you do not speak another language, I recommend you download Duolingo or Babbel, start learning another language. For me, I speak Creole, Romanian, German, and Twi. Nothing of any great benefit that I can really communicate with my patients. So this year I decided I was going to teach myself Spanish, and I've been doing Duolingo for the past year and a half. I'm finally getting there. But this is a great way for you to bridge language barriers. Service. The two reasons that I see people with good grades and good GPAs get denied is not enough clinical and mostly not enough service. I am astounded because medicine is one of the highest service motivated careers out there. And if you haven't demonstrated that you're willing to go that extra mile for other people, and this is the important thing, service, much like medicine, is not about you. Okay, it is about how you change through the service that you've done, interacting with other people, understanding the people you're serving, the impact that you can make on another person's life, and to be able to demonstrate selflessness. It's interesting because oftentimes, like, many people will write in some of their essays about how they've interacted with X, Y, and Z person and made them much more appreciative of what they had. That's not really what we're looking for. We're looking for you to understand another person's journey. So you get that by, like, volunteering with hospice and understanding the impact of end of life on other people and their families, becoming a mentor, be it in your college or to underserved kids or with Big Brother, Big Sister, working in the VA or working in the prison system where you understand the barriers that people face, working with Meals on Wheels and delivering food to those who are facing food insecurity or the elderly and loneliness, doing things like volunteering on a crisis line and understanding mental health and the stigma that that faces. When we're talking about service, it needs to be a minimum of 6 months for at least 50 hours and something that you do on a regular basis, once or twice, a month, once a week, but done on a regular basis, which is why I am begging of any of you who are looking to apply this cycle, if you're looking to get help or even doing this on your own, sit down right now, write out everything you have, what you have, how many hours, how you group things together to maximize the length of time and the length of exposure and the number of hours. And if you're missing something, you need to get on the ball right now to fill that in while we're doing everything else before you get ready to submit. I'm going to give you a code for at the end of this. If any of you guys want to work with myself or one of my counselors, I'm going to give you a code. All you have to do is to book an appointment on our website. You go to the Princeton Review and you go to medical admissions counseling, and at the top there's a big yellow block that says schedule an appointment, and schedule an appointment. And with my enrollment advisor, all you have to say is webinar. You can get 2024 advising now for the cost that we pay, that somebody in 2023 would pay. Plus, if you say webinar, you get an additional $500 off Premier and $300 off our comprehensive package. And if you pay, and you get 12 months to pay, if you pay in full, we'll throw in another $500 and another $300. So you, in theory, could get basically $2,000 off the 2024 package if you pay in full, and you could get $1,200 off the 2020, the comprehensive package if you pay in full. The other way is, you get $1,500 and $900, which is still a dang good deal. You just have to say webinar. Social. This is not to date and schedule, people. This is about the things you've done. Have you been involved in clubs, honor sororities, your fraternities? Do you play a sport? Do you play musical instrument? things that will make you relatable to other people, not just the doctor, the hoity-toity doctor in the room, but ways that you can interact and develop connections with other people. All right, so what it takes to get a good personal statement. I am doing a webinar in January, so I would encourage you guys to register for that one, where I will go into much more detail about how to hammer out your personal statement and your experiences. But your personal statement should give us some idea of why do you want to be a physician, what makes you unique, your journey, okay, and make the admissions committees want to meet you. You want to tell a story. You want to avoid the overuse of I. You don't want to say, I want to be a doctor. By the way, you should always use physician. Avoid the I love science. My grandma died and I want to change the world. I want to know your journey. Too often people will write a personal statement all about their grandma and their struggle and everything. This is not your grandma's personal statement. This is yours. Okay. Secondary applications, as I told you, are generated by 90% of schools, and they're going to come out for Texas and DO programs, usually in May or June, once you get verified. For MD programs in July, you want to return them ideally within 2 to 3 weeks. And this is what I said, you want to start writing core essays as soon as you get your primary submitted. A lot of these questions will repeat themselves, so people get caught in this every year. I don't know how many times at Carolina I'm reading an essay going, oh, you wanted to go to Rutgers. That's good, because they copied and pasted and did not check between reusing essays. So just be careful. The interview, I think we're going to continue to see this going on. We thought that after COVID, where everything was done virtually, that we would go completely back to in-person. But now I think we're going to always see a blend of this virtual versus in-person option. It's just made us as admissions committees a lot more able to interview more people. However, I will tell you, although on the admissions committee side, we tell you it doesn't matter whether virtual or in person, if you're given the option and you can make the in-person interview, always do it. I without fail can always tell you I seem to get a better sense from our candidates that we interview in person. You need to make sure that you understand you cannot make a first impression. That comes from everything. That comes from the way that you've done your makeup or your haircut or the suit or outfit that you wear. And in July, I will do a whole webinar about how to dress. But I'm going to tell you, if you don't own a suit, you need to get a suit. This is the most important interview of your life. Women, same thing. Men, I'm going to tell you, you want to get a non-white shirt. White, it's like everybody wears a dark suit, white shirt, dark striped tie, like a red and black tie. Y'all look like a bunch of penguins. What I always say is get rid of the white shirt, pick yourself a nice pastel shirt. I always say pick something that matches the school where you're interviewing at. If there are school colors, pick a tie that is similar to that. And you want a power tie. If you go to like a Jose Banks or a Men's Warehouse or whatever, they know what that is, but that is a dynamic tie that has a unique, engaging pattern on it that will tie to the shirt and the suit coat. For women, you want a suit jacket and you want a straight or scoop neck cami or blouse underneath it. No collared shirt. There is no way to get them to lay correctly. If it's a virtual interview, it is, I can't tell you how much I make and remake virtual backgrounds, lighting, everything. You need to be prepared to answer all types of questions. I do a whole interview series about how to approach a question. But here's the key thing. Biggest things I find out. Number one, millennials and Gen Z people do not struggle with and oh, but y'all cannot start a sentence without going, we'll say, tell me a little bit about yourself. So, you can't start a sentence without saying the word so. And I would be willing to bet you're not even aware that you're doing it. The way you get around it and the way you approach any question is that you should know that your basic interview question should be answered between 1 minute and 3 minutes, no longer than that. You should always start with what we call a trailer that lets your interviewer know what to expect to be coming. For instance, if they say, why should we give the last seat in this class to you? You can say, you know, I'm actually interviewing with 5 other people today. I met out in the lobby and they were amazing, but not one of us is going to come in and go, Sally out there, she's awesome. You should give it to her, because we all want that spot. ultimately it comes down to what I feel like I would bring to this program and why this program is such a good fit for me. So let me start first with kind of things I feel like I bring to this program. What you've done is, number one, you've stalled, you've avoided using the word so, and you've thought about what you're going to talk about, and your interviewer knows what to expect. Too often than not, people feel like it's like Family Feud. I ask you a question, it's like, bang, I got the answer. We don't need you to just spit an answer out to us. We're looking at what your thought process is. The other biggest mistake we get is that you talk at your interviewer instead of talking with them. You need a change in tone. You want to slow down. You want to speed up. You want to be engaging and conversational. Again, got a whole prep on that. And send thank you notes unless instructed not to. Gap years, as we talked about, gap years are the common thing. Almost 70% of students are taking gap years to strengthen their profile. You use your gap year to fix whatever is the weakest part of your application. If you don't have enough service and clinical, get your butt out there and get a job and start volunteering also. If you need to fix your GPA and your MCAT, then you apply for a master's program and you do the work. But you use it to strengthen your application. I can promise you I've never had a student take a gap year who did not count it as beneficial. And I'm going to tell you, the system works, the class system works, getting it together, knowing how to put your application together works. Last year, we saw 36% acceptance rates. Of the students I worked with last year who followed my guidance and got interviews, I got 100% of my students in. Currently, with students I'm working with right now, I've got over 70% of my students have already gotten interview invites already, and I've got already 50% of my students in. But you've got to know what you bring. You got to be willing to take the additional time if you need it. You got to invest the work, and most importantly, you got to understand what you bring to the table. What are your selling points? How do those selling points match the core competencies and how you talk about them? It is truly like wanting to sell yourself. So real quickly, because I'm going to I want to take the last minutes to answer your questions, but if you could tell me if any of you guys out there would like more advice on how to prepare for the MCAT, how to navigate the admissions process, specifically working with me, or would like to know how the work that we do with tutor.com could help you boost your GPA, etc. If you would like any information on any of that, just let me know and I will have Garrett reach out to you. Remember, say webinar to get your big discounts. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this poll and I'm going to come back to you guys. And just real quickly, we can help you get into your dream school. We can help you with tutor.com to boost your grades. You know that we are the longstanding authority in test prep, but putting all that together into your admissions package, that I cannot undervalue is having that guidance and helping you know what you need to know. We can help you with your primary, your secondary only, and this is majority of what we do start to finish, either my other experts with our comprehensive programs or working directly one-on-one with me throughout the admissions process. So before I get there, let's go and see what questions we have. Will we go over who to ask and how to ask for letters of recommendation? Okay, so for letters of recommendation, we generally would like, and if you guys have other questions, make sure to post them because surely I've got more than one question because I only see one. But so if you've got others and you're still online, feel free to type them in there and I will get to them. But in terms of letters of recommendation, so here are a couple of things that I recommend you do. Right now, buy the access to the MSAR, the medical school admissions requirement handbook that the AAMC puts out, because when you buy that access, it actually gives you not only the median GPA and the median MCAT, which is what you should be working toward, but it also gives you things like required and recommended classes. So AMCAS requires a full year of chemistry, a full year of organic chemistry, a full year of biology, calculus, and English. What they don't require, which is really funny to me, is physics, because you need physics for the MCAT, so we always say 2 semesters of physics. With that in mind, there is a section that says letters of rec, and they will say how many they will accept, and if there are any special they require. But out the gate, this is what I recommend. Number one, I recommend that you have a minimum of 2 science professors. You should have 1 non-science professor, because there are a few schools that will ask for a non-science professor. If you've got any type of clinical experience, I recommend getting a clinical letter. Even though most MD programs don't require them, they are highly desired, is what they say. If you're applying to DO programs, you really should try to shadow a DO and get a DO letter. If you have done research, especially for a year or longer, we're going to wonder if there's not a research associated letter. And if you've been highly involved in any organization, service project, be it a study abroad, a medical mission trip, whatever, that could be a good letter to have. So ideally a minimum of 5. So you're going to have 2 non-science, 1 science, 1 clinical, 1 research, maybe 1 service. We do not want a letter from a dean. We don't want a letter from a senator. We don't care about that. And how to ask for letters. Recommend starting asking in January. Give them a copy of your resume. If you've got a draft of your personal statement, give them a draft of your personal statement. We do something with our students called an applicant strengths profile, where they have a sheet where they put their GPA, their MCAT, then they put a breakdown of like the clinical, their class things they've done, and then they do 4 to 5 bullet points about themselves. If you give that to a letter writer, you're going to get a much stronger letter. Also, if it's somebody that you were in their class, when you reach out to them, say, I was in your class fall of 2021, I received an A+, I attended office hours, so we can know how to go back and check our records. All right, I see some more questions. Thank you very much. How competitive are the MD PhD programs? So this is a trade-off on these. They are much more competitive. Generally, in terms of MCAT, we're going to want an MCAT about 2 points above the median MCAT for that school. Your GPA needs to be at least at the average for the program. But more importantly, in terms of research, we ideally want 2 years of research, if possible, ideally in 2 different labs, but it can be in the same lab. And you want experience with presentations and publications, although they are not required. They are fairly competitive, but it is such a great way to go. I did it backwards. I went to med school, and then I took years off between my 3rd and 4th years, and I did my PhDs and then came back. But it is a great situation, but you definitely want to think about it, because it's going to add it's going to add between 3 and 6 years to your graduation. For people seeking psychiatry as a career, what guidance could you provide? So psychiatry is exactly like any other residency program you apply to. You go to 4 years of med school and you do your 3-year residency. In terms of psychiatry, it's really actually not going to be important for applying to the med school. And this is, remember what I told you, don't do as I say, learn from my mistakes. I was like, I'd worked in that burn unit, and I was like, I'm going to be a surgeon. I'm going to be a burn plate. I'm going to do a plastic surgeon. That's me. I went to my med school interviews. I'm going to be a plastic surgeon the whole first 2 years. And then I got to my 3rd year rotations, and my first rotation was surgery. And oh, good Lord, I have never hated anything so much in my entire life. So med schools don't generally care what you want to go into unless you're very driven toward primary care. Psychiatry does count. If possible, shadow a psychiatrist, but that can be harder because of confidentiality. But you may want to look to volunteer with like mental health programs, volunteer on a crisis line, maybe volunteer to work with people in battered women's shelter, people at VAs, where you can really get in contact with some people who may be experiencing some type of psychiatric needs, and that would allow you to gain a better understanding for your application. My email said this lecture was supposed to be 1 to 2 p.m. Yes, well, I'm running over just a little bit. Is that okay? I'm just running over to answer questions. I mean, you guys, you can feel free to leave. It is 1 to 2 p.m. I am done. I was just staying to answer additional questions. I have been out of the academia world for a few years. I'm really struggling to try to find research positions. Any advice? I've emailed several professors in my area, but they aren't my alma mater, so there are no responses yet. Okay, so you talked about research positions. So this is where you might want to look to become a clinical research associate, to become a clinical research coordinator, to find a full-time job as that, if you are able to do that. The other thing you can look at is if you are volunteering or take a job as a scribe or in a medical practice. A lot of medical practice, and especially ERs and EMT services, are doing research as a part of ongoing studies within the hospital, and you could potentially get involved in that, which is another great way to go. The other thing that you can look at is, unfortunately, if you're applying this cycle, that could be a little bit harder, but there are summer programs. The AAMC, almost every undergraduate program out there offers some type of undergraduate research or summer research experience, which is a great way to at least get your feet wet. Is there a certain master's program that schools prefer to see you complete? Anatomy, public health, hospital administration? That is an excellent question, because so here's the thing. If your GPA is the issue and it's science GPA issue, you want to do a master's science-based program. So that would be like a master's of biomedical science. Anatomy would be fine, anything like that, but it's got to be science-driven. Public health is much more epidemiology, and it is not going to benefit your cause if the GPA is the issue. Now, if you just want to do a public health master's program and it's not because of GPA, the same thing with hospital administration and MBAs. They can give you a second master's level GPA, but you need to make sure that you're addressing the science work somewhere in a component of that. Oh, you're in the wrong time zone. Okay, sorry about that. Yes, I'm Eastern. I've applied to those positions, but they say I don't have enough experience. I have scribe experience and just started as an MA. Oh, so you're referring about the research positions. So that's the type of thing. If you can scribe or MA for about 4 to 6 months, then you're going to be much more competitive for one of those positions. But I'm going to tell you that scribe and the MA is going to benefit you far more than getting the research. Don't worry. You will need to apply to schools that don't require research or are not research heavy. And that's the big thing. If you don't have a lot of research, then just don't apply to schools like Hopkins or whatever that are very research intensive. Again, why to get the MSAR? When it comes to being a part of different specialties, what do I do if I just absolutely hate it? I've been in an OBGYN's office and I've tried derm, but lasted 2 weeks because it was an awful experience and I wasn't able to share. I'm going to tell you something. That's actually the whole reason that we want you to shadow in a diversity of settings. Okay. And that was me. I thought I wanted to do surgery. I done the burn treatment and then I did my surgery rotation and hated it. And my next rotation was OBGYN. And I have never loved anything so much in my life because my background's family medicine, OBGYN. That was my fit, but I didn't know that. And sometimes it takes being able to, for me, I like kids. Kids love me. I like kids. I don't love kids. And I did pediatrics and I was like, can't do this for a living. So it's knowing what you want to do. So I know to you, it may not feel you have consistency, but when we're talking about shadowing, we're talking even just a couple of half days. People are busy. You do a couple of days, couple of half day shifts, 4 to 8 hours, 20 hours is ideal, but getting that, if you get 20 hours in 4 to 5 different specialties, you spend half days with them for a week, you're going to get what you need. If you like it and they offer you to stay on, then that's wonderful. But we're looking for you to understand different practice settings, hospital settings versus private clinic, shadow in an indigent care clinic, a free clinic, do a medical mission trip to understand healthcare delivery abroad. There are all kinds of ways that you can pull that in together. How are candidates with PCT experience regarded? They are also regarded well. It's not quite as strong as if you were an MA or a scribe, but you are definitely learning the patient interaction experience. So that is definitely considered valuable, and especially if it's paid. So you scribe for 2 years. Oh, that would be excellent. So that's going to totally offset your need for research. She said she scribed for 2 years. That's going to be way more valuable to me than seeing research experience. So do I mention this on my medical school application? I was only there for 2 weeks, thought it might be bad to look at. No, not at all. It's different experiences. And oftentimes we have people clump stuff together. Like we put all of your shadowing in one category. That way you get longer experience, so you can list all of your shadowing areas. You can list a longer period of time and a larger number or total hours. That's going to score much better in that experiences printout than if it's just like one shadowing experience and another. You've got 15. If you're doing your experiences and you're struggling to come up with 12, or you got to list 2 hobbies, or you got to put dean's list as an honors, or you got to list all your shadowing separately, you're probably not ready. And there is no harm in taking that additional time. What is the best way to get shadowing experience? You've tried to reach out and haven't heard of any. Okay, so there are different things. Some hospital programs have hospital shadowing programs. A lot of free clinics, if you will volunteer in the free clinic, they will allow you to shadow the physician. Try cold calling. Reach out to your physician, your parents' physicians, or just cold calling. Send an email to the office administrator, offer to volunteer, offer to say that you'd only like to shadow a couple of half days, express your interest, include your resume. The other thing is to look for RAM clinics, remote area management clinics. They're like EMT clinics where you go out to remote areas and they deliver care in those areas. Consider a medical mission trip that you could do. So you want the diversity over all of those different areas. And remember, you can count hospital volunteering for the floors that you volunteered on. That's much more service than clinical. But again, if you can shadow physicians as a part of that, then it's kind of like double bang for your buck. I often talk to people who have like scribed and they scribe in the ED. And I'm like, yes, but you were present on consults, right? When cardiology or pulmonology and you observe the physicians, we can count that in your shadowing. It's all in how to know how to display it. I am a 12th grade student from India and I am a 12th grade student from India and volunteering and summer jobs are against the law. And how and when can I apply? And what tests should I take? And how to build my profile strong enough in scholarship programs? Okay, so I know in India you go directly from high school into med school, but in the US you need to complete a 4-year degree, a minimum of 90 hours for most schools. You're going to need to take the MCAT, like we've already talked about. I already kind of went through all of that information. And you guys, because you were on this webinar, will get a link to the webinar where I will post it on YouTube and you can actually rewatch it. There are scholarship programs. What you need to understand is, other than your primary like HPSP, where you're going like Army, Navy, or Air Force, or the underserved outreach scholarships, there are a couple of school-specific scholarships that most schools have, but there are many more scholarships for second and third years than there are for incoming first years because they want you to demonstrate your ability. Do the admissions committees look into certifications? So, when you say look into them, do they validate them? No, you're considered on your honor system. Does that mean a lot to us? Not really. We're really much more interested in the patient care. That's why somebody was like, well, I'm going to get my EMT certification, but I'm still going to work as a scribe. Why? There's absolutely no reason to do that. By the way, for those of you who are applying in the future, we do multi-year programs. And honestly, I greatly prefer to get the people the year before they're applying or like when they're starting as freshmen, so we can work on all those things so that you maybe don't have to take a gap year. I mean, I've got 3 people right now that I know are going to apply as rising seniors, but they've got what they needed to do. What if I'm interested in obtaining a master's abroad? There is not a problem with that, except for the fact that a lot of med schools will not count the credits for that master's abroad they'll count the GPA. You can get it evaluated through the system to get credit for it, but you may run the risk of them not giving you credit for all the classes. But because you don't need the prereqs, because they won't give you credit for the prereqs, but they may give you credits for the degree, then they'll at least be able to see the GPA. And honestly, master's abroad, cultural exposure, not a bad way to go. All right, is that it? Did I get them all? I think I got all your questions. Well, that is awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me today. Real quickly, if you have more questions, just go to my website. And my website is actually, just go to the Princeton Review Medical Admissions Counseling. And at the top of the site, and this is actually an active link when you get this, there's a little yellow tab that says schedule an appointment to talk with an advisor. And that way you can get your questions answered. You can find out about our programs. Remember, webinar, you just have to say webinar. You can get the 2024 for the same price as the 2023. When you mention webinar, you get $500 off Premier, $300 off comprehensive. In addition to that, you get 12 months to pay, and if you pay in full, we'll give you an additional $500 and an additional $300 off. So it's not a lose. The same thing, if you are applying for future cycles and you want multiple cycles, you can get the same discount. You basically get 1,000 off Premier plus an additional 500. You get a 600 off comprehensive and an additional 300, and it just applies off the total cost of the package. If you're looking at a 2025 and a 2026 cycle, you actually get 18 months to pay. I think that covers everything. If you guys have any other questions, let me know. But otherwise, it's been great having you guys. Make sure to go to the website, just to, go to the Princeton Review webinars, click on medical admissions and sign up for my January webinar, where I will talk more about personal statement and experiences. In April, I will be talking about the most common mistakes you guys make. And in July, I will be talking about writing those secondary essays and getting ready for your interview. Thank you guys so much for coming. It was great having you.